were in another church before we came here, and not too long before we left that church, they had a mission going to Mexico, and I had been feeling a call really from God to do something. I felt like I really had a strong feeling that I wanted to go somewhere overseas and do some kind of mission work. I didn't know where. And one thing led to another in this other church, and they were planning a trip to Mexico. So I was signed up for that. And as that was getting pretty close, we ended up leaving that church. We came to First Baptist Pea Ridge. We visited. This is actually the only church, because we said we're going to visit some churches. It's the only church we visited. We came on a Sunday night and then met with Pastor Al. I don't remember exactly when, a few days later, and just immediately felt like this was the place we wanted to be. And pretty much from the day that we stepped into this church, I felt like Pastor Al was talking to the church, and maybe it was just me perceiving, but it seemed like every Sunday he was talking about getting outside the walls of the church and doing something. And that just really appealed to me. And then they had a training session here for the disaster relief people with the Northwest Association, and all those different areas they train in. So I signed up for that training to get on a chainsaw crew, and it was just like right after that. This was all the same. I think we moved here to this church in May, and by August or September I was on a mission to Louisiana after Hurricane Gustav came through. And that just really felt good to me, helping people and being able to do something to help someone else. And so I think that was my first actual missions experience. I was in my 50s before I did anything like that. So I felt like that's the time God started actually trying to do something with me. I still felt a call to go overseas and do something. And I had made contact with a guy that was living with his family in Mexico. And we were emailing back. I met him through one of my clients. We were emailing back and forth and talking about a trip where maybe I could bring some people down to where they were and help out with some stuff. And all of a sudden our communication just stopped. I still believe at this point God said that's not where I want you to go. And the guy told me later, for some reason I just didn't have an email signal, didn't have an internet signal for like a month or two. And during that time I took one of my clients to lunch. I was in the financial business, and his name is Greg Prim. Greg and I sat down to lunch at Smoking Joe's in Bentonville, and I said, Greg, what have you been doing? And he said, well, I went to Haiti. And when he said that, it was literally like a shot of adrenaline went through me, is the best way I can describe it. It was just an amazing feeling. And I knew right then, there was no doubt, I want to go to Haiti. So the rest of our meeting really was spent not talking about finances. It was about how did you get there? Who do you know I can contact? The next morning, Greg gave me the name of the executive pastor at First Baptist Rogers, who was the guy that had coordinated that. John called me back and said, let's set a meeting up, and the next morning I had breakfast with him. So John had a trip coming. It would have been Thanksgiving of 2010, and he said, yeah, you can go with us. So I went with John and some other people from First Baptist Rogers. That was my first trip. We built on that trip the first building that had been built by Thirst No More. Was a little building to house some people that had been in an orphanage that had fallen. So they had built it, and they had 30 kids and the pastor and his wife and whatever staff they had. And they were staying in this little, I think it was like a double building, 12 by 24 maybe. And we ended up building the second one of those. And I think back to that and how everything was an experiment because it was so early on. Of course, Jacques, who's now the guy that does all the construction. For many years, he did all the construction for Thirst No More. He built the Hope Center. He's done all BGM's construction for a long time. At that point, I can remember Jacques didn't even know how to use a drill. I can remember putting the board down and trying to show him how to put a screw in it. He was just all over. Now he's like this big construction manager. That's been a very important relationship also over the years. So anyway, back to the first time I went was Thanksgiving. By that point, you know, they were starting to learn this process and use it. And I immediately got God just put it on me that, boy, here's something I can really get excited about and do to help some people. And I came back and I planned my next trip, and that would have been in March of 2011. The church at Broken Arrow had a team going, and Craig said, call them, maybe they'll let you go with them. And I called them, and they did. I came back from that trip really thinking I wanted to take a group and go over there. First part of June, Broken Arrow was taking another team, but we took some people too. And we worked construction, and the Broken Arrow part of the team worked orphanages and stuff like that. So we drove from Thomason all the way down to the job site at what's now Galette Chambon, and that's where I first met people from BGM. That's where I first met Pastor Matarine. Pastor said on that trip to me, he came to me for some reason and said, my brother, I wonder if you could help me in my village. And I said, I don't know, where's your village? And it's up in those mountains up there. And I said, I don't know. Let me think about it, pray about it. Well, he was on my mind from then until I got back. I couldn't get that off my mind. And as it turned out, as this team's getting ready to leave in September, all of the other guys were coming from Mississippi. I was the only one from somewhere else. They were going to meet me in the airport in Dallas. I had never met any of them, so I contacted Barbara and said, how about a phone number for the team leader so I know who I'm looking for, find them in the airport. And she said, well, I've been meaning to ask you, I just hadn't called you yet, if you would lead the team because that guy can't go. I said, sure. So they met me with a bag of money in the airport in Dallas, and we went from there together. But what that did is it put me in touch with Pastor Matarine, because Pastor Matarine was the guy on the ground for, again, it may have been First Baptist at that point, but what became But God Ministry. He made sure they had water and food and all those kinds of things during that week that we were there. But it gave he and I the chance to sit and talk a lot. I took the team up to church in his village that Sunday that we were there, and I really just felt an overwhelming burden to do something there. Bob Gladney, I met him. I think he was on staff at First Baptist Jackson at that time. And several times during that week he said, you should come on a trip with us sometime. And I said, well, I'm kind of working with these other guys. Thanks for the offer, maybe someday. Didn't really think too seriously about that. But he had insisted I take his number. So I had his number in my phone. Thirst No More's missionaries that were there pulled out at that point. So I called Bob. He put me in touch with his wife, Barbara. She was the person with First Baptist Jackson, which later, that mission became But God Ministries. But Barbara scheduled all the teams. I called her and said, hey, I'm looking to go with you guys. I met Bob. And she's like, oh yeah. Like 5 minutes later, I'm on a trip and didn't even realize it. That's how quick Barbara was. I was talking about going and sitting with Pastor Matarine, who really couldn't speak any English at that time. That would have been December 2011. Vladimir, our translator, and Thomas, who was the missionary there. And I just said, I don't know what I'm doing. You asked me to help. I haven't gotten it off my mind. This feels like a burden. Where do you get your food? Where do you get your water? I just had this list of questions I was asking him. I remember asking him this, do the people in this village get enough to eat? And he laughed so hard, he thought that was so funny. I said, why are you laughing? It's just nobody gets enough to eat in Haiti. It's like, and then after you're around that a little while, you realize that. We went through what the needs were and how do the people make their money and that kind of thing. How do they feed themselves? And then I said, oh, what's your biggest need? And he said, I feel like it's houses, because they had started building stuff down at Galette Chambon already. So I said, well, let's go look at some of them. So if I said, how many houses? He said, oh, a lot, but 7 to start with. So we drove around and got out and went to these 7 different houses, and it was the worst poverty I could imagine. I'd never seen anything like that. And I was in the Air Force for 21 years. I traveled all over the world. I saw a lot of poor people. And I just never could have imagined anything. Literally, my chicken house, which is 8 by 8, would have been a better house than 90% of them had. But Pastor Al had talked to the church about some opportunities through Compassion International to sponsor kids. So Kathy and I were doing some of that, and I felt like if we could connect that village with Compassion International, maybe that would be a really good thing to get some kids sponsored. Pastor thought it would be too. So we visited their office in Port-au-Prince, and then I realized as we got deeper into that, they needed a bigger place really than what we had. You have, with Compassion, you need a school that has a playground and more facility than what we would have had in Toman at that time. So it really wasn't feasible for them to do it. So I came back from that trip, and I'm going to say it was not but a week or two after we came back, Craig Miller called me, the head guy at Thurston and Moore, and said, I think I'm going to pull out of Haiti. And he was just really discouraged with property rights issues working around the Port-au-Prince area. You know, you're building a house, and maybe it's you build a house for someone, find out it's on somebody else's land, and just trying to wrestle with all that. And his new missionaries pulled out. So right after we left, literally they left. So he said, I'm really thinking about pulling out of Haiti. And he said, if I don't, I've got to get out of the Port-au-Prince and get somewhere where it's just a better environment, out in the country, is what he said. And I said, well, you know, Pastor, he had met Pastor Monterey. I said, you know him, why don't we build some houses in Toman, because that's what he wants to do. So he committed to me over the phone that he would start building houses there. So that would have been December of 2011. And he said, but if we're going to do that, we're going to have to have a house to bring people to. We're going to have to build something up there, because there's nothing up there like that. So I said, all right, I'll go and do that. So I planned to go back in April and do that. That would have been April 2012. In the meantime, after my son Mike, who had been overseas with the Air Force, came back, and we went pheasant hunting and went to the Sugar Bowl. And that's where he discovered I was having problems with chest pain and stuff. And it's like, why are we here, Dad? Of course, we were sitting all the way at the top, up those stairs in the Cowboy Stadium. So right after that, I went to the doctor, and he said, oh man, we got to get you here. And I had several blockages, but the 2 that had to be fixed were both in what they call the Widowmaker, like 95% blockages, and should have probably been dead already. The other thing I didn't say about the trip when Pastor Al was there is when I got on the airplane to go on that trip, my chest pain went away. And that whole entire week, the pastor could tell you, we worked really, really hard that week. I had no chest pain the whole time I was there. And I had prayed and prayed about that, about going, and am I making the right decision? The minute I got off the airplane in Northwest Arkansas, started up the ramp as I walked off the airplane to go to the gate, my chest pain came back. So for 10 days, he took that away from me. So I feel like that was definitely a God thing, that he did that for me on that trip and allowed me to go and take that team. So came back in April, had my stuff done in January, came back in April to Haiti, and we stayed at Galette Chambon. I had contacted Craig Shoemate, who had been on the December trip, and Craig said, I'll go with you and help you build that thing. So Craig and I went up there and started. I'll never forget the day we laid it out. It took us a half day to figure out where to put the corners because none of us knew how to do it really. It was what we'd call a goat rope here. And we literally wasted an entire half day trying to lay it out. And we had Jacques there with us too. He's learned better by now too, I think. When I say we built it, we certainly helped with the labor, but it was mostly Haitian workers and Jacques directing them. We were at Galette Chambon one night, and I sat with Pastor and said, doesn't look like the compassion thing's working. Neither one of us were getting anywhere. He seemed to me to be visibly concerned with that, upset about it, because he had kind of started thinking, man, what a great thing it would be if we could start feeding kids. He said, what are we going to do? And I said, well, let me tell you something. I said, 2 days ago, I think it was 2 days before that, right before I came here, this lady came in my office, and she was originally from Haiti, and she came in to see the CPA I had in there, and he was doing her taxes. It was like right at the end of the day. I was actually walking out the door. She came in, said hello to her, and started talking to her. I had met her once before, but I decided that she was interesting, so I just said I'll sit here and talk to her while he finishes her taxes up. And one of the things she said to me was, because I was kind of expressing my frustration with not being able to get anything done through compassion. And she said, you know, if God puts something on your heart, sometimes you just have to do it yourself. And I told him that. This is what this lady said. And interestingly, she was from Haiti. But she's another one of those people that God put in there that made me think, maybe we can do it ourselves. So when I said that, Pastor, he said, oh, you think we can do it ourselves? And I said, I don't know why not. I've never done it. You've never done it, I don't think so. But let's see what happens. He says, how many can we sponsor? And I said, well, 3. Because I know my family can do 3. And from there, we'll see what happens. He said he was so excited that maybe 3 kids could have a sponsor to go to school. He had 75 in the school at that time. I sent Kathy a text that night and said, here's what I just committed us to. She sent a text back just immediately and said, tell him that when we come in June, we want to try to get 10. So, and she said, I'm sure we can find sponsors for 10 kids. So I said, great. So that's what I left him with. We'll try to do 10. So here's what I want. And we sat down and said, here's the information we need on each one of them. We want to get them all together and get a picture, that kind of thing. And figured out how much we felt like we needed to be able to pay for the kids' school. So I came home with that, saw Al in church, and he said, well, how was your trip? So I told him, I said, here's what happened. Here's what I just committed to. And he immediately said, I want to get the church involved. Text Pastor and tell him we want to try to find 20. So I texted Pastor back and said, when we come in June, we're going to try to get 20. Kathy said the only reason she went is because I badgered her so much about it. She's scared to death to fly. She said, I'm going to go one time so I can see what it's about. She's the one that eventually said we need to move over there. So Kathy's really the one that brought that up way before I ever. In fact, I said, no, I don't want to move over there. I'm going 5 times a year. That's enough for me to do. In fact, the mission with the medical clinic and all that was Kathy. We were living in the house that's now the security guard's house. That's the one that Craig Shoemate and I started building. Craig Miller went before we came back that second time, and got it to the point where we could use half of it. So we had a co-ed situation there, just an empty space, 12 by 18, with me and my wife, a married guy and a single woman on air mattresses. But it worked out fine. Then we went to the school, and they had, on a particular day, they had all the kids that we were going to try to get sponsored at the school with their parents. And we sat down initially and just got all the information, and then they brought them through and we got their pictures. And instead of 20, we had 21 because it was a set of twins. And that's the ones that are Woodley and Woodler. We're the boys that live right next door to the what's now the security guard's house, our old team house. Kathy and I have had them since the beginning. Aaron Harrington, this little boy, grabbed her by the hand from the time we got there. This kid always had a huge grin on his face every time I've ever seen him. And he would not let go of her hand the whole time. Because she said, I want to sponsor a kid. I said, have you picked one out? She said, well, he picked me, so I'll sponsor him. So that's how the sponsor program got started. So we brought that information back to the church, and I think other than Aaron and maybe one or two more, most all of those initially were out of our church. And so the sponsor program initially started just out of the church. Sat down with pastor, and we had formed a committee in Haiti, pastor and 4 other village leaders, not all from the same church. They were spread out, so it really was something that included the whole village from the beginning. And we had a meeting when I got there, and I said, I don't know what we're going to do with this. We got the first money. How are we going to feed people? Are we going to pay for the tuition just for these sponsored kids, and then give the rest of the money to them to take home to their families every month? Or another idea that I got from a guy named Ben Baugh, who he and his family have a sponsor program at a place called Laganov, which is the island out in the Haiti Gulf there. And I had met with Ben for lunch just prior to that, first time, and he said, what we do is feed the whole school with that. And so I asked them, I said, is that a viable option? We got 75 kids, we're sponsoring 21, have enough money for 21 every month. Is that enough to feed all 75 of them? And they talked among themselves and very quickly said, yeah, it is, and that's what we want to do. That will eliminate any kind of jealousy or anything else. And it did, and to my knowledge, still today, and we're going down the road 7 years, over 7 years, I have never heard of a complaint from someone that said, you know, my kid's getting treated differently, because they all eat. Always, if you sponsored a kid, you were feeding 2 or 3 more besides your kid. And that's a hot meal every day. Which in Haiti, you know, the average kid, he may go a day or 2 and not eat in between meals. And to me, that's always been, I've always even said, even if they don't learn to read, they're getting a meal every day. But the beauty of that sponsor program is they are learning to read, and they're getting biblical instruction every day. They're learning about Jesus in those schools. So that program that started with a school that had 75 kids now has over 800 between that school and the school in Machias, which was built later. To me, it's just incredible that that's all happened. It's just absolutely mind-boggling. And what's really mind-boggling to me still today about all of this is that God has allowed me to be part of it. And I do believe, as a way of testimony, before I ever really truly got convicted that I wanted to go on a mission trip of any kind, I can remember praying and asking God to use me. Show me what you want me to do and give me the courage to do it. I prayed that day after day after day, month after month. And I truly believe God honors those kind of prayers. And then allows you to be part of it. I just think that's amazing that we get to be just part of that, one of the pieces in there. I never dreamed God would use me to help with something like that. Never dreamed of it. The August trip went back with the money in August. The other thing that happened in August was a Hurricane Isaac, and Gary Bailey, guy I mentioned way back, was down at Galette Chambon at the other location with some other guys that same week. I hadn't seen him. We had talked. He called me on Thursday. I was scheduled to go home on Saturday. And I really came for a short trip to give the money and kind of get that started. I think my trip was only scheduled for 3 or 4 days. I was going to hop in and hop back out. But Gary said, hey, we're going home a day early because this hurricane's looks like it's going to hit Haiti. And he said, you should go with us, see if you can get out of here and go with us. And I said, well, I really can't, because we're having a meeting with parents on Friday night. And I feel like that's really a key to the sponsor program, because that was the parents that were coming with their kids were the next group of kids we wanted to try to get sponsored. I think 20 or so. I also remember Pastor Al and Kim's first kid, Fabiola, was part of that group. And as we went and did that, again, I feel like God took that moment, and I had an option. You can go or you can stay. I'll stay. But he took that moment and used that to do a lot of the stuff for these kids later. So met with those families on Friday afternoon. And I remember the storm was, it was, if you've ever been close to a hurricane, you see the big wide sweep of the clouds and how they're making that circle. And we were getting that, and it was raining and wind gusting. It was kind of coming in, and we got 19. Had kind of decided that was it, and we were headed back to the team house. And on the way, here comes Fabiola and her mother with an umbrella. They were hurrying to try to get there, and so we actually got her picture on the street in the rain. We were headed back to get some clothes for me, because we're thinking we might end up staying at Galette Chambon, because I was scheduled to go out the next day. Probably not going to, because it looks like the hurricane's coming in. So I think picked my stuff up and went back to Pastor's house. And while he was getting his clothes, I got a message on my phone that said that the flight had been canceled for Saturday. So we decided to go on to Galette Chambon and see what would happen anyway. Maybe something will change. So we rode out the hurricane at Galette Chambon, and I'd never been directly in one. I had one close one time, but and the winds probably didn't get above 80, 85 miles an hour, I don't think, where we were, but it was still horrifying to me, because it went on for hours and hours. I mean, literally seemed like 12 hours that this thing went on. And those tin roofs, it would just roar and feel like it was lifting the roof off, and then it would die down a little bit, and then it would roar again. That went on. I didn't sleep at all. Got up the next day, is starting to kind of wind down. I asked Pastor, did you sleep at all? Oh, yeah, I slept all night long. So he just let me sleep right through it. And we have water like this inside. It just came in under the door. So now here I am. What am I going to do? And I only had taken a limited amount of clothes, because I was only going to be there for a few days. So I managed to text Kathy. She got a flight for me, brought those home, and then very quickly those kids, I don't remember if it was 20 or what, that was kind of what I did. They got sponsored really quick. I made 2 trips back that fall after that, both of them to get more sponsor kids. We decided we needed to break it off from the church and form a separate nonprofit. So we did that, and John Dye and I worked together, John being the CPA, to put all that paperwork in and everything, and we were told nobody ever gets it done the first time, and IRS approved it right off the bat. so that, I felt like God just really opened the door for us there, and that allowed us to really then start asking other people from other places and making it open to everybody. So, and I think I ended up going back twice that fall to get more kids. Pastor Al and I and Kathy went back over there. I believe it was March 2013. And one of our goals on that trip was to go to Machias, which everybody knows where Machias is now, but at that point, nobody had ever been over there. And I knew it was over there because Pastor and I would talk about it. And I said, "Where do you see this going, Pastor?" I'll never forget him saying, he was looking back towards Machias and Bois Polit, and he said, "I'd love to see this all over Haiti, my brother. I'd love to see children sponsored everywhere out here." So we made our way to Machias that day, and it was about a 45-minute walk over there, I think, to get before you got to the village. But then we walked way on up through the village. I can remember the exact spot where we all sat down and ate peanut butter crackers and took a break and drank some water. That was an eye-opening thing for me, and you can see when you go over there, and a lot of people have been there now, how much more poor it is even in Toman. And so I had a burden for that place. But July of 2014, we put a team together. It couldn't have been, wow, just probably not more than a couple of months prior to us going that it looked like our medical efforts were going to kind of fall through. Kathy was our only nurse going, and we had a couple others that were going to go and weren't. And Donna, who was in the nurse practitioner program at UAMS, sent an email out on her own. She's a student. She sent an email out to the entire population of UAMS, called students, and said, "We need people for this trip." This, again, couldn't have been more than a couple of months prior. So all of a sudden, I start getting phone calls just off the wall, and figured out then later that it came from Donna, where we thought we were only going to have a couple of nurses and not be able to do what we normally did. Normally we would see in a week probably 200 patients. We would do clinics at the old church in Toman there. We ended up taking, I think, 4 or 5 additional nurses that came from what Donna put out. So by Thursday, somewhere along in there, Pastor Matarin and I were talking, and I said, "I don't recognize a lot of these people that are coming to the clinic." And he said, "Because everybody in Toman that has been sick has been seen already, so there's a lot of people coming from outside." So he said, Pastor said, again, there's Pastor Matarin, who has been so key to all this. You could never, God just has used him in an amazing, amazing way. He said, "What would you think, my brother, if we invited people from some of the other villages, and we'll just reserve the last day just for those people?" So I said, "That's great. That would be awesome. Let's do that." So he did that. Prior to this visit, I had never seen anyone except Jesus. We had done a lot of food, sponsor, build houses, lots of things. And I had prayed a lot before this trip about, "Lord, I don't know why we're not seeing this. Maybe you just don't intend for us to see it." So I had fixed in my mind, we're planting the seeds. And I know that's what happens sometimes. So earlier in the week, we'd actually had 3 people that had accepted Christ. That was, one came to me at night, asked for a Bible, and I had him come to church the next day at clinic, and we talked, and he accepted Christ. And then a couple at one of the we did a remote clinic down at not that remote, but Soyet, down at the bottom where the river is, that village, and a couple there. So that was kind of neat, because I never really thought God was going to use me to try to explain that to people. That was not my mind. I'm the guy that can organize people you know, figure out how to get the house built, do all the organizational stuff, and I really felt like that was going to be my role over there. I never thought it was anything other than that. He'll use other people to do this other stuff, this talking to people. So we'd had 3 that had been saved already that week. The first ones I'd seen in several years working over there already. Every time that we did a clinic, prior to this, before every clinic, every day, all the times we'd done medical clinics, I would go outside, meet with the people before we started clinic, tell them that you know, we're here to provide some medical care, but really we're here to tell you about Jesus. And I would love to talk with you one-on-one. I'll be the last guy. I would be the guy passing out we call them hygiene kits, but toothpaste, toothbrush. A lot of people in this church help put all those things together. But I'll be the last guy as you finish, get your medications, stop and see me. Nobody ever stopped. For 2 or 3 years there doing these clinics, nobody stopped. And so I'm just like, well, God's not going to use me for that, but we're planting those seeds. So the day that we reserved on this trip in July 2014, because we had all these extra nurses, God put all of them in there. Did the same thing, stood up, talked to them. First person comes through, stops and wants to talk to me about Jesus. Wow, it's pretty cool. It was an elderly lady, and she wanted to hear the gospel, and she actually was she showed me her Catholic card. She had a card. And Catholic in Haiti is different than it is here. It's a mixture kind of where they mix voodoo and Catholicism together. So it's not what you think of as a Catholic in the United States. But she said, I want the true Jesus. And I spent about probably 25 or 30 minutes with her, talking to her about, and I started with Adam and Eve and the fall from grace, and then transitioned to John 3:16 and went through some of those kinds of things. I had that information in my head, so I think it's important that people, they really need to be in their Bible every day. I've just become so convicted of that over the years, that you need to be in touch with God every day, and the way to do that is through prayer and being in your Bible every day. And I really didn't know when the first person stopped to talk to me exactly how I was going to phrase it, but God really gave me the words to lead her through that. She got on her knees and accepted Jesus. I thought, wow, that is so cool. Well, she walks on out the door, and I look up, and there's 2 more people standing there waiting for me to talk to her. It was a man who was probably in his 50s, and his aunt, who I would guess she was probably 80. They sat on the bench, and I went through the same exact thing, 25, 30 minutes. Started with Adam and Eve, did all that. At the end of, I said, I don't know how you're feeling. And he said, she had not said a word, the lady had. She hadn't asked any questions, she just sat and listened. The man said, I'm really strong into voodoo, and I'm scared to death. I feel like I need Jesus, but I'm scared to death that I'm going to be in real trouble with Jesus if I do this, and I backslide, and I'm just afraid to do it. So I gave him a Bible, and I tried really everything I could think of to say, you know, you're never going to be good enough, all those kinds of things, but he just would not, he wasn't going to do it, so okay. Well, I thought they were leaving, and his aunt jumped off the bench they were sitting on and got on her knees and said, I want Jesus right now in my heart. Will you please help me? So, yeah, so she did. And then they walked out, and I looked up, and there were 4 more people waiting. All 4 of those accepted Jesus. They finished, and there were 10 waiting. And by this time, I understand a lot of these people that were there with us, several that were there on the team have been with us on other teams, and none of us has ever seen anybody except Christ at one of these things. So by this time, all the other people in the clinic are looking back there like, what the heck is going on there? By the end of the day, we had seen 200 people in the medical clinic, which was twice what we had ever seen. And our guys working in that clinic worked literally from the time we started early in the morning until dark. And 38 people accepted Jesus up there. And I'll still say that was one of the most amazing days in my life. I look back at that and how that moment or that day was so important for a lot of reasons. But it makes me think again how God took Donna along. She sent the email, and then all these people volunteered to come and help us. We would never have had that extra day for the people outside the village if we hadn't had those extra people there to allow us to do more, to see more people. So I guess that was 41 that week that accepted Christ, and I don't know how many trips by then we've been and never seen a single one. So, and now our next trip to Haiti was when we moved there. So this was right, God gave me this right before we moved over there. And it was really like a slap in the face to me. God telling me, I'm not sending you over there to build beds or to build houses. I want you to go and tell people about the gospel. And so it really opened my eyes to that. So we moved over there beginning of November 2014. During that first time there, I lost 15 pounds. I went from 200 to 185 just from eating avocado, I guess. But it was so difficult to try to cook a meal. We did it 2 or 3 times and it was just like, this is not working. I know at least once a day and a lot of times twice a day our meal was avocado. If we could get chips in the store, you couldn't always get them. We had, tortilla chips and avocado, but you couldn't always get those. Somewhere around, I want to say the 9th or 10th of November, Stan Buckley showed along with some of the board members, and they did an opening ceremony at the Hope Center. The problem was the Hope Center wasn't open yet, but they had planned that for their opening. There were people spoke, and a lot of people there from the community that came in, and big celebration. Well, they go home, and the next day there's 25 people in front of the little team house wanting medical care. So we had some bags with some medicine in it, and Kathy would literally sit on the steps of the team house and see patients all day long. I'm not kidding, she probably was seeing 25 a day from the team house, and didn't have medicine for a lot of the stuff, but we had some stuff, and then some key people I think that God put in there. Keith Taves and his family lived up a few miles from where Jesse and Kirsten Lanker live, up in the higher mountains. Some of you have been up there and know them. So Keith and his family lived up there, and about 5 miles out from where Jesse and Kirsten did. And they had had a medical clinic up there for several years. They were about 23 miles from us. It took 2.5, 3 hours to get to them over that road. But Keith and I had met each other before and had been in contact with each other by email a lot, so they knew we were coming, knew we were there. And one evening, kind of like around dusk, he shows up and he's got a great big SUV and he's got it completely full of medicines. They backed up to our door and unloaded just a whole, like a Suburban, full of medicines for us. So, and they did that 2 or 3 times for us early on. So that was really neat to see how God used them to try to help us get started there. But Kathy saw so many people on that doorstep. And then of course, people would come to me and say, you need to, well, my daughter's sick or my mother's sick or whatever. So I just took the freedom to start scheduling appointments for Kathy, even though she's already seeing 25 a day. So a guy came to me one night after dark and said, my daughter's sick, can I bring her? And I said, she's had a really long day. If you can bring her in the morning. So I had him show up at like 6 in the morning. That was, so then after he left and we get in bed, I said, oh, by the way, there's somebody coming to see you at 6 in the morning. She said, nope, that ain't happening. I've told you, you need to quit doing this. I've asked you to quit doing this. You're not allowed to schedule my appointments. And then she eventually said, I'll see him if he comes, but you better not ever do it again. So something like that. So she got the message through to me. He came down the next morning and said, she's okay. Didn't need to bring her. So, but I learned a lesson from that. Don't schedule Kathy's appointments for her. She'll do that herself. But she was such a blessing to the people there, even when we were, people thought we were open because of the ceremony, but we weren't open yet. Our church has been on the front end of all this from the very beginning. And our pastor, Pastor Al, went with us the first time in 2011, I think December. And I'll never forget, at some point, he was preaching from the pulpit and he was talking about doing stuff outside the church. And he said, we all need to be doing something. And I don't know what you're doing or where you're doing it, but for me, it's Haiti. And when he said, I think, but for me, it's Haiti, when you have that kind of support coming from your pastor, I feel like that his leadership has been so important to what we're doing in Haiti. I can't overemphasize how important and how God has used him, and not just for our church, but our church has been on the forefront of all this. We built the first house there. We started the sponsor program. And not to brag or take pride in our church, but you know, when the first food distribution program started, when we first did that, Kathy and I were living over there by then. They'd had a severe drought, and we just said, we've got to feed some people. First time our church raised the first money. Everybody sees it. A lot of other people, a lot of other churches did it, still do it. This recent thing where we said we're going to start food distribution again, several other churches have already jumped on after we did it. So God has just really used not just individuals, but our church in particular, our little church. God has just used us in an amazing way to get, to open a lot of this up. First team to stay in the new Hope Center was Pea Ridge, First Baptist Pea Ridge, and I can remember those guys. I think everybody that came, or most of them had already been there, and stayed in the old team house. So to them, it felt like the Taj Mahal, because we actually had a bunk bed with a mattress on it by then, and we had a cistern that had water in it, so we didn't have to. They didn't have to go to the river and get water every day, like we did back in the. Although a lot of us would probably say those are fond memories from when we took a truck and a 55-gallon drum, went and got our own water every day. So they were the first ones, and I can't tell you who the next ones were, but I know, again, Pea Ridge was, when that place opened, they wanted to be there. And when Stan Buckley was there in November, he and I sat down on the steps of what is now the girls' dorm up there. The girls' dorm faces the outside wall, to be specific. We were sitting on those steps, and I said, Stan, and he and I talked a little bit about this, but I said, I don't know how this is going to work with the sponsor program, because people know, they see us here, they want to know how we got here, and that's a key part of it. And I just don't know, how do we do that without stepping on VGM's toes, and how do we do that overlap? And he just said, well, why won't we just move the sponsor program to VGM? Well, my very first thought, I freely admit it, was, well, that's our program. I was proud, that's our program. We had about 85 kids sponsored at that time. So now, we're, 2.5 years into it. It's pretty good. The beauty of that sponsor program is that, your funds are not only paying for your child to go to school, but it's providing food, and it's allowing other children that aren't in the program to eat also. So that was always the big thing for me from the beginning, just to see those kids eat that may not be eating otherwise. But he said, why don't we move it? I'm like, well, I don't know about that. I said, well, let me think about it. Let me talk to the board about it. But you know, they had such a much bigger footprint, and all these teams that are going to come are coming through them. So then it's an easy conversation to say, I took every single person that came on those teams when we were living there, went to the school, and I told them the story of how it started. Every single one of them. And I'll freely admit, I said, you know, these classrooms were built by First Baptist Pea Ridge. These initial classrooms, first kids, all that. But when we moved to BGM, it grew so much faster. And we came home, presented it to the rest of the board, everybody agreed. And we had conversation about it, but everybody agreed. And we moved it to BGM, and today there are, I don't know, maybe 450 kids sponsored, and there's 800 in school between Toman and Machias. I will tell you that this would have been at the beginning of, I wanted to get kids sponsored in Machias. I wanted to get kids in Machias going to school. Nobody in Machias was going to school. There was one person over there that could read and write, one man. And I only know that because I had had a census of that village because we were doing food distribution. I wanted to know how many families. We had 66 families and about 150 total people living over there. And I even had the names of all of them. That came from, I asked for it and had invited the old village leader, Emulus Darylus, another key person. In Machias, I had said, you know, we'll bring somebody over, bring a translator. And we were over there doing Bible study with them, singing hymns, whatever. He said, oh no, I've got somebody here that can do it. And before we left that day, I had the list of everybody in the village. So we had that one guy that could read and write. So I really, really, really wanted to get kids started in school. And I talked to Pastor about it, and we would never go anywhere with it. So then, beginning of 2016, Kathy and I had made the decision we're coming home. Some other people were coming to help us, and we said, well, you're going to help, we're going to leave, okay? Because we think it's time for us to go home. And the Haitians were pretty much running everything by then anyway. I think in January, I know it was in January, I told Pastor, he said, well, it's not a good time of year now, we're in the middle of the school year. I said, I'm going over there and I'm going to get 10 kids and I'm going to send them to school. And I was forceful about it, but I wanted it done because I really felt God was putting a burden on me to get something going in Machias for those kids. And every time I went over there to do Bible studies, sing with them, whatever, they hit me with that every single time. So we arranged a day and went over and got the first 10 kids, and those kids are the ones that walked to, and there's still some beyond them, like for a while after that we put some in, before we built the school over there, that walk to Toman and back every day. They walk over an hour, but you know, big deal. They don't mind. They walk all the time, and they're going to school. And I think a key person there, again, the day that I thought we had it all arranged with this guy that could read and write, and with the village leader, Emulus Darylus. He's an old man now. He's probably close to 100. He can tell you who the president was. He remembers who the president was in the 1920s. He never learned to read and write. I've given him an audio Bible, and one time I replaced that, and I didn't realize I'd give him the English version of it, so didn't do him any good. But what an amazing man. He just, every time I would see him, he would just throw his hands up and praise God, and he would dance when he'd see us come, and he'd just, oh my gosh. He was so happy for what was happening in his village. So between he and I and the guy that could read and write, we set a day. I took a translator over there. So I want 10 kids. I want them all from different families. And we're going to get them started. So I thought it was all a done deal within the village. Everybody's ready. Well, we get ready to start this process, and we're talking about how we're going to do it. And people are lined up with their kids. And I see these 3 guys sitting 20 feet over there, and they're loud. And they're talking up at us. And they're obviously not too pleased that we're doing this. So they got loud enough, I finally just said, hey, just come on over here. One of you come over and let's talk about it. So kind of the leader of the 3 came and sat down, and he said, we don't need to send our kids to Toman. Our kids need a school here. And I said, I couldn't agree more, but you don't have a school here. And I don't have a means to get one here. We need to pray about that. A lot of you know that happened eventually. But I don't know how to do that. Right now, your kids have an opportunity to go to school in Toman. So I really, really want to get it started. But if you as a community decide you don't want to start it, then that's fine, okay? I'm here to do it if that's what you want to do. I see this lady standing next to me. I'm assuming she just kind of worked her way up there. And I knew that she had a child in the school. She actually had 2 in the school in Toman. She had done on her own and was getting up at early in the morning and taking them over there and then going to pick them up after school. And she and I had talked before, so I asked her if she would mind, very humble, quiet lady, would you mind sharing with us what you think about this? And she tore into those guys and just said, you know, if you want your kids to be stuck like they are, I'm just paraphrasing here, then just keep it like it is. She said, I get up at 4 o'clock every morning and get my kids ready. I walk them over there so they can be there for the Haitian national anthem at 7 o'clock. And this made a huge difference. My kids are learning to read and write. They're learning about Jesus in school. And boy, those guys just shut up and it was done at that point. And so God used her to really, really start that. So we got those 10 in, and that started the program with Machias. A lot of you know that eventually the school got built in Machias, which I would never, in my small peanut brain, I could never have envisioned that would have happened. But through a lot of people, 3 young ladies, Callie Watson, Lindsay Hart, and Maddie Spencer, it's not Spencer anymore, from our church, were over there as interns. But I never could have dreamed that you could get the materials up there. Well, they found somebody with a dump truck who agreed to drive up the dry riverbed. He dumped 55 dump truck loads of sand. Now think about this. Those of you that have been know from the riverbed up to where that school is what a hike that is. All that was done in 5-gallon buckets. Some of it packed on the back of donkeys and mules. Most of it carried by men and women back and forth to one of that school built. That's just the sand. Think about the water. Think about the blocks, the concrete. All of that carried up there by hand. Okay. Never would have dreamed that that could have been done. I know I told them to pray about it and we'll see what happens, but those 3 young women really kind of got that kicked off, and then did a fundraising campaign. A lot of people contributed in a lot of different ways, but it got done, and what a miracle that is. So there are kids that are going there from Machias and Boispoli, Trou de Manche, from Dubois. A lot of villages back in there, kids come to that school because there really aren't enough in Machias to fill it. So, and Pastor and I had talked about it many times. If we had a school up here, you know, you'd be able to have kids from these other villages coming. So that place is just a miracle. But old Emulus, my friend Emulus, one of my dearest friends, Emulus Darrellis, the village leader there, from the beginning when we started doing medical clinics over there, he was always there and always encouraging us. So anybody watching this, I would always tell you, when you go over there, go to the village leader first. Don't go up there and start doing stuff. I don't know how long he'll be there. He's an old man. But if you go, always go see Emilus first. Give him the respect of doing that. He's been there for a long time trying to do stuff for his village and help them. He's a Christian. He tells me he's been a Christian since he was a kid. I asked him one time what his favorite book in the Bible was, and again, he can't read, but he's got the audio Bible, and he says it's Peter, because God built his church on Peter. Just an amazing, kind-hearted, humble man. Always polite to the extreme. If we showed up, they'd bring every chair they had and put them out and expect us to sit in them. Many, many hours of joy sitting there in that village under, we used to say, we'll just go to the mango tree. I don't know if it's still, they go to the school now, but it was a big mango tree. We'd go sit in the shade of that and tell Bible stories and sing hymns. And just the most amazing worship times I've ever had. It's the first time after Al and Kathy and I went, and then we moved over there. First time I went to Machias, after that, I went over there and had a translator, and I walked up, you know, the old path, not through the riverbed, but up over the hill. And I just thought, I'm just going to go visit and see what I see over there. Nothing specific. So I come up, and there's a house on the left. I go out there and talk to the lady, pray with the lady that was there. She has a house today, by the way. We started building houses there a couple of years ago. That's amazing too. Pea Ridge built the first one, by the way, again. Got it started. As we did in Bois Polit. Still today, the first house, or all the houses in Bois Polit at this point have been built by Pea Ridge. So, it sounds like I'm bragging. I guess I am a little bit, but I'm really amazed at how God has used our church. The day I walked into Machias for the second time, you know, a year or two after Al and I and Kathy had been there. First house, prayed with the lady. I go back out and I look, well, there was another house past hers, a couple of houses to the left, and I'm like, well, you know what, I'm just going to skip those and just kind of meander up through the village. And so I start on up the path to pass those houses, and this little skinny lady comes running out, yelling at me, throwing her hands around, and grabs me by the arm and drags me back. And I thought she was mad, but she wanted me to pray with her and her friends. It was her and another lady, and who were both walking, and there was a lady sitting with her back up against the wall of her house. And she was explaining to me, I had a translator, I'm not sure who it was, but she was explaining that this lady can't walk, and we really need medical clinics over here. You have the clinic in Toman, but we can't get to Toman with everybody. Sometimes you need to come to us. That really stuck with me, and when I got home that day, I told Kathy, I said, we have to start doing some clinics over there. I don't know how we do it. We had kind of ruled it out because we, in our own mind, had decided it was too rough terrain to have to try to carry bags full of medical stuff over there and that. But what wouldn't have been more than a month or so later, we took our first clinic over there. And Emilus we'd tell him when we got there, okay, we could see 40 people today, 50 people, whatever. And so we'd pass out cards. And that was always an experience, how they would fight over getting in line who got the cards. It was not really funny, but still a little bit funny to see. A little bit different. You understand when you understand they don't have anything. And they've always had to fight for everything they have. And you get aggravated in the moment. Why are you fighting? I'm going to give you a card. But in the moment, and you think back about it, you realize they've never had anything that they haven't had to fight for. But Emilus would help me pass those out. And I remember the first day we passed out audio Bibles, and I thought they were going to kill me and him both, because we only had like 5. So I gave them to him to pass out, and he got one or two, and they just kind of attacked him. So I jumped in, took them back from him, and managed to yell at them enough that they backed off. And then he told me who to give them to. But that first clinic, and he would always do this at a clinic, we'd pass out these cards, and then kind of at the end he'd squeeze 2 or 3 more in. You know, oh, you got to see this lady or something. He brings this woman and this little baby who is obviously starving to death. He's obviously just almost dead. I'm not kidding. Just nothing but skin and bones, literally. And Kathy sees her, and there was another lady there that was there with the team that was there. And she was a nurse, and she and Kathy attended this lady. Turns out she's a little bit handicapped. She really didn't know how to breastfeed her baby. She had already had another baby that had died. She had lost one previously. So Kathy says, this baby's gonna die if we don't get him some attention really, really, really quick. So she convinced her to bring him to the Hope Center the next day. And they started trying to give him some formula and stuff. But he had to get to the hospital. And thank God, because always they didn't get in the hospital. Thank God that he was able to get in the hospital. They kept him for a month. And Kathy had arranged with there was a lady up in another part of Haiti who had a malnutrition center. And she actually did it out of her home, I think. She had arranged to get them there, but they were afraid. The mom and dad had never been out of Machias, I'm convinced. They were scared to death that we were going to take their baby away and they were never going to see them again. So they refused. So let me back up a minute. The first thing, when we got him in the hospital, the dad was going to go get him out of the hospital. And I'll never forget the conversation that he and I and Pastor Matarine had. Pastor Matarine brought him to me and told me what he was doing. I just tore into the guy and I said, you're going to kill your baby. If you go get him out of that hospital, you're going to kill him. And I just talked to him. I really talked to him really harshly, but I felt like at that moment I didn't know what else to do. And thank God they left him in there. By the time they brought him to Kathy, I will tell you this, he was 5 months old and he weighed 5 pounds and 5 ounces when Kathy saw him the first time. When he came out of the hospital a month later, he was about 6 pounds. So he had gained, 11 ounces, I guess. So they refused to take him to the malnutrition center or this lady's house. So pastor picked her up, brought her and the baby to the Hope Center to Kathy. And since we didn't have any other options, Kathy said, I'm going to have to train her how to do this. So she sent her home with formula, gave her bottles, showed her how much to give him, and said, I want you back. I don't know if it was every day or every other day. Anyway, by the time, when he came back the next time, he was already losing weight again. So, and he obviously was not getting the formula that he needed. Somehow God gave Kathy, she could tell you better about this, but he gave it to her that I need to treat this lady like a little kid. She had some stickers. And she said, every time you give him this much milk, you get to put a sticker on here. And that motivated that lady to feed that kid. And guess what? Today he is 4.5. He'll be 5 in January. And we saw him the last time he was there. We got an update on him recently. He started school this year in the school of Machias. And we had to sponsor him. And we're just amazed by that whole thing, that God saved that kid. We had some that came that died. Once people found out about us, that we were there and that they could get help. In these outlying villages, there were a lot of people that were there were kids that were dying of hunger in particular, and probably older people. I'll never forget the child that was, my memory is she was 17 months old and she was just listless, and Kathy asked one of the guys to come get me and have me look at her, and for the idea of me arranging transportation to try to get her to a hospital. So we did, and took her to 3 different hospitals. They got her to drink a little bit of something. She never opened her eyes that I could see. She just kind of laid there. And 3 hospitals that they took her to, and none of them could take her. They didn't have room for her. And she died 2 days later. And I'll never, ever forget that. And that's why the malnutrition center that they have now is so important. I don't know how to explain why, but I do know that when people are at their lowest, they feel drawn to God. And I hope that through this, I pray a lot of them are coming to know Jesus through this. There's a little girl named Rosemana. Rosemana fell out of an avocado tree. This is while we were living over there. And she broke her arm, her right arm, and kind of maybe this part of her arm. And they took her to a voodoo guy. Well, of course, that didn't heal her. And a couple of days later, or 4 days after she heard it actually, she came to us. But this time her arm is swollen horribly. It looks awful. Kathy says we got to try to get her to a hospital. And she's going to lose the arm. She may lose her life if we don't do that. So got her into a hospital. Found somebody that could do surgery. It was going to cost about 60-some thousand goods to do that, that was at that point over $1,000 in U.S. money. I want to say about $1,200 at that time. So where's the money going to come from? Family was going to take her out, bring her home. Again, one of those conversations where, and it wasn't harsh like the other guy. It was, please don't do this. We'll find the money. We will get the money. You just keep her there. Let's get it done. I said, go get what you can, raise what you can. They actually put together about $200 US, which is a lot of money for somebody to get together. I don't know who all they begged, borrowed, stole from, but they got it. And then there was some money sitting at the BGM, which had been left over from a doctor who had raised money for another cause. I contacted him and he said, use it. So there was the money. I wish I could remember his name. I can't. But anyway, she can't use that arm today. She had a sponsor. She lost her sponsor recently. And again, Kathy and I are thrilled that we get to sponsor her now. She can't use that arm. They were not going to let her go to school. She begged, please, just, I'll do anything. Please let me go to school. I learned to write with my left hand. And the last time I was there last year, in August 2018, I was able to see her. She came to me and wrote some stuff with me. They were not going to let her go to school. I mean, she really begged them to let her go. She's #1 in her class, by the way. #1 in her class at the end of this school year. Rosemana. Beautiful child. And we got an update on her recently. If you could have seen her countenance back at that time and then see what the beautiful smile she has today. Just that opportunity of being able to go to school and get a meal. It's amazing what it does. The other part of that story briefly is that I knew this family was connected with voodoo. So one Sunday afternoon after her surgery, translators came. I was resting. Both of us were, and it's like your days are so long, you're tired, and they said somebody's down at the gate wanting to see you. And oh my gosh, what now? What is it now? I go down there. Well, it's the dad of this little girl, and he's wanting to thank us for being part of getting her the care she needed. So we brought him in and talked to him about Jesus, and he agreed to bring his family members back next week. Interestingly, he never came, but 4 of his family members came. We had that same long conversation. 3 of them accepted Christ. I know that he's in church, pastor's church in Tomah now, so I'm assuming, I haven't asked pastor, I should do that, but I know even last year, every time I was there, he was there and in church. So God uses those horrible situations when we used to go to Machias to do all these, when we did the clinics or go over to just worship with them, we'd come over the hill and go down. Again, it took us 45 minutes to get there. These two guys would come. There was a guy that only had one arm. No idea what his name is, if he's still alive. And then Yvonne, who is what we think of as the village leader at Wapalit. They'd always be there at the Machias stuff, and they would ask me if I would come to Wapalit. Please, please, please come to Wapalit. So I told them in December of 2015. I said, I'm gonna come. I'm getting ready to go to the United States for Christmas. When I come back, I'm coming over there. So I did. I'll never forget, he was working way up on this high mountain to the south of the village there. And I found his boys. That's the first time I ever actually went to the village. And we came up from the other side and drove up a road. I'll never forget when I yelled, or his boy yelled for him. I didn't know he was up there. He's away. You could just barely see him. He runs down that mountain to see us because he knew that we were coming at some point. I guess he could look down and see. That started our ministry in Wapalit that day. But we started that day, we started doing kind of what we were doing at Machias. We were building houses and the houses came later, but we started just doing worship with them. Just sitting under a tree, and another mango tree. And people would pull up a rock that big around. Never figure out how somebody, why not just sit on the ground? If it's a rock that big, it's not really helping any. They'd sit on these little rocks and gather around and just sing and worship. And best days of my life, those times in Machias and Wapalit, we were worshiping people. And again, now today there's a lot of kids that are in the school of Machias that are from Wapalit. Several houses have been built there. One of the most beautiful spots in that area is the little waterfall. We did a lot of Wednesday Bible study. We started that early on in the Hope Center when we were there, and I always enjoyed those immensely because almost all the people that came were coming from outside Toman. We did those there at the Hope Center. Never forget this lady that was walking from a village that was past Machias, Dubois. I walked there and back one time, and then the other time I managed to get a guy to take me up the riverbed and drop me off, and I walked back. But it's a 2-hour walk one way from Dubois. That lady was 7 months pregnant when she was coming to the Bible study every week. I don't know whatever happened with her and the baby. At some point she wasn't coming, but they just were so hungry to hear the gospel, and just beautiful times of worship. Some of you have been there for those Wednesday worship times. Yvonne from Wapalit was always there. Geraldus from Machias, who was the guy that Jesse Ma, some people know him as, he was the guy that was always did our census and could read and write. And the school there is just amazing. Kathy and I moved back February of 2016 and continued to go over there, for the last, up through 2018. And my illness got to the point where I couldn't go anymore. Kathy's tried to go 3 times the last year and got knocked out by the violence going on every time.